So good evening, everyone. I am Prof Astrid Shah, moderator of this session, and welcome you all again. Here we are at Valedictory session after 2 long days, and for this session we have a special guest all the way from Germany. And now to move forward, I would like to invite our respected Professor Millia ma'am, head of the Department of English, Jamia Islamia, New Delhi, to deliver her concluding remarks and as well as to chair the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Fazal. A very good evening to all of you. And I welcome Astrid Ensslin. We are so honored and so privileged to have you with us, Astrid. It's fantastic to see you here. And this is how we get to meet finally. But really, really grateful to you for giving us so much time and, sharing your scholarship with us. A very good evening to all of you, to the valedictory session of this 2-day conference that we've had, courtesy our dearest colleague and friend, Dr. Shimi Mone-Dole, on e-literature explorations in literary creativity. Friends, I must say that since Shimi will be giving the vote of thanks towards the end, she'll never thank herself. And I must thank Shimi for a fantastic treat that she's offered us in these last 2 days. I must say that right from the conception of the conference to this final day, she's been single-handedly managing this show. There was such an overwhelming response to the CFP, and so many people responded that finally she had to actually run parallel sessions. And that just goes on to tell us about the health of e-literature and the kind of interest that it generates in scholars across the spectrum. And she's been able to really put together such a fantastic conference for us. We started off with an introductory keynote address by none other than Professor Leonardo Flores. And what a fitting end to the conference that we have actually Professor Astrid Ensslin to actually conclude this conference. I think the two sandwiched together already speaks volumes about the level of the conference. We've also had absolutely fantastic sessions by plenary speakers such as Marjorie Loosberg. We had Amira Hanafi. We had Samyabrata Roy, we had Shanmuga Priya, we had Shobhik Mukherjee, we had Siddharth Chakrabarti. Besides, of course, absolutely fantastic and brilliant presentations from researchers from all across India, all across the world, who've come together and offered their insights into this area. We've also had fantastic discussions, as we've seen. And that's exactly what a conference is supposed to do, which is to not just open avenues for new ways of thinking and bringing together people working in the area to think together, but also to share their views and their insights. And I'm sure for many of our researchers who've been participating in this conference, it is going to open up new areas of thinking and new areas of working. And I'm really, really glad at the kind of presentation that all the sessions have, the participation that all the sessions have seen. I must also, of course, thank all my colleagues from the department for chairing these sessions. And most of all, I want to thank the colleagues from the department who've been helping organize the conference, Shazia and Sumaya. And of course, a range of scholars who have not just been rapporteuring, but also people like Fazal and others who've been handling so much more than that, technical things that probably people like us are not so good at. So I really, really want to thank everybody for such a treat that we've had in the last 2 days. But I really doff my hat off to my dearest friend and colleague, Shimi Mone-Dole, for this absolutely fantastic treat of a conference that we have had. And I don't really want to take too much of your time, and I don't want to stand between you and the speaker, because I'm sure you don't want to listen to me, and we're all eagerly waiting to hear Professor Astrid Ensslin speak. But I think there could not have been a better end to this conference than to have her with us. And I'm really grateful to Astrid for taking out her time and for being with us and for actually concluding this conference for us. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing her speak. So with that, I welcome all of you to this valedictory session. And I'm sure it's been a fantastic 2-day for us. And we're going to go away from this conference deeply enriched with many, many ideas in our heads and ways of thinking forward. I also want to thank the Electronic Literature Organization And as Shimi and I, we've been putting our heads together. We really want to have something concrete in terms of a course and papers, and maybe, so we'll think about all that. And I'm pretty sure that these papers will also probably come together in the form of a volume. But for that, I will hand over the virtual mic to my dearest friend and colleague, Dr. Shimi Munidole. Thank you so much, Shimi.
So now, as you know, the webinar, so we will have Ms. Dr. Sumaya Naz to, present a summation of the papers presented in this webinar. Okay, Sumaya, you can, now, summarize all the papers. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I'll just present the report quickly. The Department of English, Jamia, Millia, Islamia, in collaboration with Elit India, hosted a webinar on e-literature, explorations and literary creativity on January 16-17, 2023. An impressive lineup of scholars from across India and many parts of the world, as well as well-researched papers on the subject, helped make the webinar a success. The webinar has had 66 presenters in 16 parallel sessions and 6 speakers in 4 plenary sessions, besides the inaugural and valedictory sessions. The inaugural session opened with remarks from the acting head of the English department, Professor Mukesh Ranjan, who welcomed the guests. This was followed by an address by the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Languages, Professor Mohammad Ishaq. The convener, Dr. Shimi Munidole, then introduced the theme of the webinar and invited Professor Leonardo Flores, Chair of the English Department, Appalachian State University, USA, to deliver his keynote address. Professor Flores in his lecture spoke about the awakening that he feels is required to appreciate electronic literature. He traced the trajectory of e-literature through 3 generations, starting from 1995 to the present. In his call to action to develop a robust culture of electronic literature, Professor Flores urged the academic community to develop frameworks that empower people to create electronic literature without advanced ICT skills. The first parallel session, 1A, had 4 presenters. The session was chaired by Samya Brata Roy, PhD scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Jodhpur. The titles of the papers were Vemani Sarjubai Shah's paper, Confessional Narratives and Mediated Identities of Young Women Poets on Instagram. Virginia Alzira Sisidis' paper, Instagram Poetry, Boon or a Bane. Dr. Shelley Narang's paper, Beyond Metaphors and Similes, The Changing Landscape of Poetry in the Digital Ecosystem. Dr. Champa Chetri's paper, Slam Poetry and Digital Technology and Assessment. Parallel session 1B had 3 presenters. The session was chaired by Dr. Siddharth Chakrabarti, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. Vinay Rajoria's paper was Reconsidering Our Ideas About Literature with the Democratization of Publishing in the Age of Insta Poetry. Mohammad Fazal Mahmood's Shah's paper, Digitalization to Preserve Culture and Identity, a case study of Silheti Nagri's script. Arifa Banu's paper, E-Literature as a Form of Political Aesthetics in G.R. Carpenter's Poetry. Parallel session 2A had 2 presenters. Pompey Basumatri's paper, Documenting Archives and the Benefits in Studying Colonial Historiography in the Era of Decolonization. And Nabanita Sengupta's paper, Authorship, Authenticity and Archiving, Change Experiences in Indian Elit. And the session was chaired by Justi Joseph, doctoral student at IIT Indore. Parallel session 2B had also 2 presenters, and the session was chaired by Dr. Shubia Abdi, Associate Professor at Department of English, JMI. Ahana Bhattacharya's paper, The Tweet and the Post, Tracing the Dynamics and Interactions with Elit on Social Media. And Manodeep Chakrabarti's paper, Polyphonic Encoding, Text, Digits, and Conditional Recall of Hypertextuality. Then we had the first plenary of the session, which was chaired by Professor Nishad Zaidi, a senior professor of the English department, Jamia Millia. The first speaker was Dr. Souvik Mukherjee, Assistant Professor in Cultural Studies, Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata. In his presentation titled Unelited Electronic Literature in India, Dr. Mukherjee spoke about the lack of an archive for electronic literature and suggested the need to develop a vocabulary for literary criticism, which is not entirely based on traditional literary criticism. He also talked about the problematic perception of digital literature being associated with the young generation. The second speaker was Dr. Siddharth Chakrabarti, Assistant Professor at the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, in his presentation titled, O Elit, Elit, Wherefore art thou electronic? Deny their father and refuse thy name. Dr. Chakrabarti spoke on digitality and its roots, as well as electronic and its roots. He discussed the illusion of factuality, objectivity in literature, and went on to talk about who controlled the network that marked Elit as a fringe or a mass platform. Then we had session 3A, which also had two presenters and was chaired by Professor Nishat Haider, Department of English, JMI. We have Sumana Mukherjee's paper, How Indian Webtoons and Webcomics Are Emerging as per the Field of E-Literature, and Debadrita Chakrabarti's paper, The Counter-Politics of Digital Comics in India, Reading Literature of the Digital Space. In parallel session 3B, we had four presenters. It was again chaired by Samia Bretta Roy. Tanya Kaur and Alicia Chauhan's paper, Elit Therapy, Understanding Trauma and Healing Through Selected Manhwa Comics. Supirto Roy's paper, Interactive Conservation in Virtual Reality, Generating Sustainable Meta-Narratives of Interspecies Bonding as Part of Ecological Elit. Abdullah Parvez's paper, Post-Traumatic Memory and Traumatic Post-Memory, The Letters from Battlefield 5. J. Mariam Nancy's paper, Elit as Digital Humanities. Then we had parallel session 4, which also had 4A, which also had four speakers and was chaired by Professor Anuradha Ghosh of the Department of English, JMI. Muhammad Abdullah's paper, The Problem of Further Decentralization in the Scopes of E-Literature. Swab Ahmed's paper, E-Literature, A Theoretical Perspective. Zainab Abrar's paper, From Intertextuality to Hypertextuality. Santoshi Mishra's paper, Writing with an Edge, The Novelty That is E-Literature. Then we had parallel session 4B, which had two presenters and was chaired by Dr. Siddharth Chakrabarti. Ruchi Nagpal's paper, E-Literature, Understanding the Contours of an Emergence, and Keerthana Jayarad's paper, Rule of Interactive Fiction in the Teaching Learning Process. Then we had the second plenary and the final session of the day, which was chaired by Professor M. Asaduddin, Senior Professor in the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. The speaker for the session was Amira Hanafi, writer-in-residence, Coastal Carolina University, USA, in a presentation titled Language as a Practice, Creating a Fluid Glossary for Eco-Social Transformation. She discussed how some of her recent projects situated in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and the evolution in Egypt. She shared that her projects are based on an explicitly political idea of languaging, which disrupts the hierarchy of named languages and made a distinction between the focuses in language usage on meaning-making process and creation of fixed meanings. With this, we start with the report for day 2. It started with a plenary session. The speaker for the session was Professor Marjorie Coverly Lusbrink of Humanities and Languages, Irvine Valley College, California. Her talk was entitled Ongoing Innovation in E-Lit. She emphasized in her talk that the field of electronic literature is an emerging area which has expanded opportunities and has brought our imagination closer to real life by inventing new practices and is thereby an experimental literature. Essentially talking about how electronic literature has evolved over the years, Professor Marjorie elaborated on certain essential points that keep e-literature enriching. Then we had the first parallel session of the day, that is 5A, which had 3 presenters and was chaired by Dr. Tanisha Gwynn, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Jodhpur. Prakriti Bhatt's paper titled Theorizing Third Generation E-Lit, an Analysis of the Digital Writing Applications. Nidhi S.'s paper, E-Newsletter and Literary Subjectivity, Forging and Narrativizing the Self via Mass Electronic Mailing. Bhavya Arora and Paranshi Sharma's paper titled Understanding the Constituent Elements of E-Literature Through Terribly Tiny Tales. Then we had parallel session 5B, which also had 3 presenters. It was chaired by Dr. Souvik Mukherjee. We have Sweta Sarkar's paper, For a Minute There I Lost Myself, Negotiating Art and Meaning in the Virtual Exhibition, Kid Amnesiac by Radiohead. Abhi Ganguly's paper, Cyberpunk 2077, Narrative and Role-Playing in an Open World. Mohammad Haseen Ahmed's paper, Digital Young Adult Literature. Then we had parallel session 6A, which had 4 presenters. This session was chaired by Dr. Shanmuga Priya, postdoctoral scholar at the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies, Canada. Kavasha Alagia's paper entitled It is Narrative or Experience, Thinking Between the Nodes, The Case of At Nightfall, The Goldfish. Karthik Nair's paper titled Generational Trauma and Imagination in What Remains of Edith Finch Through Multimodality. Nazmul Saqib's paper entitled The Ongoing Hijab Debate in Iran and India, a study through archived internet memes. Nikat Banu's paper, Facebook as a Metaverse for Poets, for poets, right? Then we had parallel session 6B, which I also had 4 presenters and was chaired by Professor Suroj Mahananda of the Department of English, JMI, Soumya Charan Pahari's paper, Refining the Indian Rap Scene, Shrishti Tawre's Ek Tha Kawa and Bachpan as Sensory Vehicles of Storytelling in the Digital Medium, Durba Mandal's paper titled Lost in Translation, a study of translated Bangla horror audio stories on YouTube, Rashmi Sharma's paper, the Digital Mythologies of Mahabharat, a study in polysemy of the graphic, Sri Devi Santosh's paper, Conjecturing Digital Modernism in Bhasha Literature. Then we had the plenary session, which was chaired by Professor Amina Qazi, and the speaker for the session, there were 2, of course, speakers for the session, Dr. Shanmuga Priya and Smanya Brata Roy. Dr. Shanmuga Priya began with the story of her entry in the world of digital humanities. She spoke of past, present, and future of Indian electronic literature. In a talk, she charted the evolution of the Indian electronic literature, differentiating it from its evolution in the West. She also noted some of the characteristic features of electronic writing, which are of late beginning to reflect in Indian electronic writing too. Samya Brata Roy was speaking on the topic accessibility in Elit. As the name suggests, this paper delved into the politics of accessibility of electronic literature and challenging the common notion that digital technology is democratic and ensures free accessibility for all. Then we had parallel session A, which had 4 presenters and was chaired by Dr. Shimi Moni Doli, our convener. And the papers were Mridul C. Mrinal's paper titled Remediation of Young Adult and Graphic Novels in Digital Space, a discourse on DC's He-Man comic series. Glita Trapasso and Gordon Noel Pyrus's paper titled The Bizarre World of Otaku Culture in India. Rishit Newby's paper, Which Core Aesthetics? Saim Raza's paper, Disruptions in Immersion, Cyclic Narratives in Interactive Fiction. Juveria Feroza's paper, titled Invisible Existence, Transperson's Journey from Blogging, and Becoming Visible. Then we had session 7B, which had 4 presenters and was chaired by Dr. Gitanjali Roy, assistant professor in Tripura. We had Swati MB's paper, Slashing the Intersexual Palimpsest, study on the transformative potential of slash fiction narratives in the cyberspace. Akanksha Goswami's paper, Reading Interactive Fiction. Sanobar's paper entitled Technology, Enhanced Literature and Augmented Reality. And Iram Alvi's paper titled Exploring Digital YAL and its Reception in EFL Classrooms using UTAUT model. Then we had parallel session 8A, which had 4 presenters and was chaired by Professor Nishad Haider of the Department of English, JMI. Violina Bora's paper titled Narrative World Building, a Look at Gender and Sexuality in Fan Fiction. Jasdeep Kaur and Kulveen Trehan's paper titled Clutching On to Gender Tropes, Framing of Gender Roles and Power Dynamics by Young Indian Writers of BTS Fan Fiction. Fehmida Sharmeen's paper titled An Exploration of Fan Fiction as E-Literature. Jui Goon's paper, Is That Normal? Reshaping Male Bodies Through Slash Fan Fiction. Then we had parallel session 8B, which had 4 presenters and was chaired by Dr. Sabah Bashir, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, JMI. We have Yaka Zeleks-Nikar's paper titled Media Artifact Proposal, Private Property, Access Forbidden. Kanis Fatma's Wani's paper titled Development and Theoretical Framework of E-Lit Practices in India. Reshma PK's paper, Just a Fingertip Away, Eco-Psychology and Digital Environmental Humanities. And finally, Professor Anuradha Ghosh's paper titled From Page to Screen, Random Reflections. And that's it for the report.
Thank you, Supriya. Now I would like to introduce, Professor Astrid Ensslin. Professor Ensslin is a, professor of, digital humanities and communications in the University of Regensburg, Bavaria, Germany. And she had also been a research affiliate in digital, culture and narrative at the University of Bergen, and an adjunct professor in the digital humanities and game studies in the University of Alberta. So her area of interests are digital media aesthetics, communication and culture, electronic literature as literary media, language in the media, specialized language corpora. Besides that, she has a host of other publications, which is, the most, iconic or most famous among gaming is literary gaming. And besides that, she's also somebody, I don't want to go into the details and take much of her time, so that it would, lead to less time for Professor, Enslin's speech. We are all more keen to listen to her then, because we are all aware of, her achievements. We can Google and find out a lot. But, the thing is that her political interest lies in being, a very inclusive, kind of a teacher and an advocate and a researcher, which, actually, talks about a lot about her interests, as a human being, not only through, her academic, achievements or credentials, but also, her very, very staunch, belief in the inclusive policy. So that's, her. And if you want to go further, of course, we will know a lot. I would now like to offer the platform to Professor Ensslin to, actually, deliver her, valedictory address. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Doley. It's funny you should be talking about my extra academic interests. I've made sure to represent part of my surroundings here. This is a brand new picture of where I live, or have lived since the end of December. This is the historic city center of Regensburg, which is a UNESCO World Heritage. Beautiful medieval buildings dating back to the 13th century. And I've even included my kids here. Who've been enjoying running around here. And as it happens, I mean, this is actually not, this is not a collage. I have the ELO like within constant eyesight here in one of the shop windows, except here, I think it means something different. Anyway, so long story short, let me just address the entire audience here, and especially Professor Simi Malhotra, Dr. Shimi Monidoli, Dr. Sumaya Nas, and Dr. Shazia Salam, and with a big thank you for inviting me. Like it's such an honor for me. It's actually also the first time I've ever been a valedictorian speaker. I had to do some research and ask various people what this actually means. But what it has given me access to is not just, the entire set of abstracts and also the ambition to attend as many talks as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend all of them, but I hope I've still managed to, capture at least some major ideas of this conference. So when Dr. Doley approached me about this opportunity a few months ago, there was no doubt at all in my mind that this was going to be a groundbreaking event, an event that would help define the field of electronic literature in India for years to come. And today we can indeed look back on 2 densely structured conference days, richly packed with a plethora of inspiring talks that collectively point the way forward. My personal experience of attending has exceeded all my expectations, and they were high and ambitious to begin with. Attending many of the talks opened my eyes to the fantastic work and the unique aesthetic, scholarly and infrastructural, but also communitarian parameters surrounding e-literary activities in this ever-changing, prolific, and academic and creative field. So I want to use this lecture to reflect a little bit on the historical context within which we might place this week's experience, and to make some projections about where I personally, from my very limited external and arguably probably colonial perspective, see Elit in India proceed from here. And so please take any of these projections with a pinch of salt, and feel free to challenge, critique, subvert, and override them all openly and without fear of causing offense. I'm here to learn as a humble observer and student, and I hope that this encounter will bring forth further fruitful collaboration and constructive dialogue in the foreseeable future. So this talk will be filled with stories, personal stories, mind you, and so please don't take any of them as representative of the entirety or even the majority of Western European Elit scholars. I've organized my lecture in an entangled way, weaving my own experiences into an account of the emergence and development of Elit as a genre, movement, and scholarly field in Europe and America, especially Europe. My story is inevitably eclectic and will need to leave a plethora of key movers and shakers unmentioned. It's not my intention to signal that those unmentioned are of lesser importance, far from it. My account is simply a reflection of my current situated context and the cognitive access it allows. So let me begin. My own academic career started in the early 2000s, during the beginnings of second-gen Elit in a geographically hybrid manner. I had been offered to conduct a PhD project under the supervision of English literature professor Peter Paul Schnierer at Heidelberg University, while simultaneously embarking on my first academic position as a teaching fellow in German as a foreign language at the University of Leeds, UK. And there was little in the way of an e-literary community at the time. And especially in Europe, not many people had ever heard about literary hypertext. Just as a side note, at this point, most countries and regions in Europe were and still are lagging behind the US and Canada. They're often bundled together as one big Western enabled whole, but I have to say, and I'm experiencing this right here, right now, there are big differences, especially as far as digitalization goes. So anyway, and at the time I went to school, most of my fellow students did not have access to a personal computer or programming classes in school. I was lucky enough to have a very short, like 1 week introduction to BASIC. Not that I was very keen on it, but we had to. And there was no way of me even practicing what I had to be learning at home. I just did it. I learned the lines off by heart, and I made it to work, but that was it. So that was very sad, actually, I think. And it's also indicative of a divide that still lasts, that still continues. It may not be as pronounced as we know as the difference with some countries in the global south, but yeah, still. So when I started looking into Elit, the term was not widely in circulation. People tended to use this stuff, hypertext or hypermedia fiction or poetry. Some people, Mark Bernstein especially, called it serious hypertext. And the ELO had only just been established, remember, 1999, and its conferences were not yet open to a broader international academic and artistic community. All the greater was my joy when, in a completely serendipitous moment, I happened upon Roberto Szymanowski's book, Literatur Digital, and I'm translating the subtitle, Forms and Trajectories of a New Literature, at a bookstore in Stuttgart. In fact, Stuttgart's major bookstore where my parents lived. So notably, unlike most Elit books that have ever been published, since this book was on display in the popular science section in probably the most visible public-facing area of that bookstore. So note that. Fancily at the time, the book also came with a CD-ROM. And that CD-ROM contained all the works that had been competing in Germany's first and probably still only major e-literature competition called Literatur Digital. Needless to say, I was hooked. I spent the next few weeks and months playing, replaying, and beginning to analyze and write about these flashworks with a capital F on the CD-ROM, trying to come up with a way of reading them that would do justice to their unique multimodal and ergodic qualities. I even sent an article manuscript to Britain's most eminent academic journal in German studies, German Life and Letters, just to find that the reviewers could not really see the point in allowing, quote, this kind of reading of these kinds of texts for publication. The slightly dismissive quality of their comments, questioning the very validity of the subject, turned out to be indicative of a more general attitude towards electronic literature as an academic discipline at the time. Theoretical approaches to understanding and contextualizing Elit were only beginning to emerge, with major works by Catherine Hales, Espen Orsted, George Landau, David Bolger, and so on, being studied as canonical scholarship, yet mostly within the epistemological confines of late print culture. And so it became one of my first major research projects with Dr. Ellis Bell at Sheffield Hallam to develop a medium-specific analytical toolkit to examine digital-born fictions across a rapidly expanding ecology of platforms and technologies. This project which gave rise to books like Analyzing Digital Fiction with Hans Christian Urustad and Digital Fiction and the Unnatural. More recently, was particularly focused on qualitative methods of transmedial, cognitive, and anti-mimetic, in the sense of sort of, looking at avant-garde, non-conventional forms of narrative analysis. And we developed a variety of concepts, from interactive metalapses to anti-mimetic U and cybertextual velocity in the course of this collaboration. More recently then, my interests have moved from the text to the reader player. And in the Reading Digital Fiction project, Alice Bell, again, with Lyle Skeins, Isabel van der Boom, and me, we have developed empirical methods of studying readers of digital-born fictions with regards to how they process and understand hyperlinks, for example, hyperlinks in hypertext fiction, or textual U and second-person narration in flash hypermedia fiction, or different types of immersion and how a player switch between them in literary games, or ontological ambiguity in app fiction, where you have an interlocutor who seems to be a real person but turns out not to be, and so you are torn between ontological spheres quite literally. And then finally, in the final chapter of our most recent book, orientation, reader orientation and empathy from a critical point of view in VR allo fiction, like a form of autofiction. Furthermore, my own institutional positions in new media and game studies in the UK and Canada enabled me to develop research into literary gaming and the language of gaming, which again led to several book projects. And I would be lying if I didn't confess that in my current research, I remain particularly interested in the ludic aspects of electronic literature, in the agency of choice, in hypertext reading paths, in the multimodal procedural qualities of digital fiction, the playfulness of approaching verbal art as a democratic, liberating, yet simultaneously critical endeavor, in the ways in which readers turn into players, like, all different types, explorers, warriors, reflectors, socializers, and also in the ways in which online reading can contribute to mental health, self-compassion, and activism. So my current work on writing new bodies or body worlds with Christine Wilkes, Carla Rice, Sarah Riley, and Megan Perham is the most tangible manifestation of this interest. But how can we see this trajectory of mine in the context of the emergence and growth of Elit as a genre, discipline, and community in Europe? Surely this emergence did not happen at a steady pace, but rather in waves. Let me take the example of German language Elit as a vignette. In what I would call the prehistory of the field during the late 90s and 2000s, individual artists, scholars, and journalists were working on pioneering experimental projects without, however, any continuing funding or institutional recognition or support to speak of. An exception, an important one, would of course be the ADEL project, the Archive of German Language Electronic Literature in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, led by Peter Gendola and Jürgen Schäfer at the University of Siegen and funded by the North Rhine-Westphalian Ministry for Innovation, Science, and Research. However, when you go to this archive now, there is nothing. It's all completely dysfunctional. So once the funding ends, the archive ends, or in this particular case, the database. That is very sad, right? There are new ventures to bring it back to life, but this just happened, unfortunately. So there was no imagined or manifest community or overarching research infrastructure to draw on. And this was mainly due to the fact that, as Jürgen Schäfer put it in a 2011 speech, Elit, quote, cannot be easily integrated into the context of national philologies, which were still dominant in the curricula of most European universities, still are to an extent, but this is crumbling a little bit, right? To our benefit. In other words, the decisively transnational, interdisciplinary nature of Elit failed to fit into the well-established silos of academia, which at the time created an existential crisis for the field. And this institutional in-between identity, as Szymanowski put it in the introduction to the teaching section of the 2010 anthology Reading Moving Letters, led to Elit scholars and practitioners landing in a variety of disciplines, from art, design, and creative writing to computer science, linguistics, media and cultural studies, to the more traditional philologies of English, German, Italian, Spanish, French studies, right, and so on. And this gave rise to the perpetual question of where Elit is actually at home. Where do we belong as Elit scholars, and how might we build an academic identity in an essentially nomadic, diasporic, ever-morphing, and category-defying field? This existential crisis was reflected by my own situation as an early career scholar in the UK. When I started my PhD on first and second gen Elit as a creative tool, and I also created a third gen concept, but many people have done that since. Anyways, like I did that in relation to the second language university classroom, creative writing classroom. I often got comments from senior professors questioning the very validity of my undertaking and recommending with the best of intentions that I should also do research in a more established field, right? Such as early modern drama or 19th century novel, or else I might never get a job. Some went as far as to question the very existence of Elit as a scholarly field that one can even study and do research about. So interestingly, these comments mostly came from senior literary scholars in contemporary English and German literary studies, where I had my affiliation, right, methodologically and epistemically. So contemporary literature, right, there's a lot of skepticism. Funnily enough, people in medieval studies, they seem fascinated, and especially because of the multimodal and material aspects of Elit research. And so we ended up at Bangor University, we ended up enthusiastically co-creating teaching syllabi and actually teaching them as well, that demonstrated the continuities between manuscript, print history, book culture, hypertext, and hypermedia. I also received a far warmer welcome from neighboring disciplines like computer sciences, which thought that was a pretty cool thing to study, except that they couldn't really help me with my research question. Or like social sciences, like education, where there was strong interest in the applied aspects of Elit, but very little practical experience in the classroom. How do you even teach that? How do you even make sure they all have access to this stuff, right? Media studies, they thought it was cool too, but it wasn't games. Can't you do something about real games? I often heard, and later social media and blogs. When I showed them Elit, they just felt positively alienated. Okay, but it was a start. And then interestingly, linguistics, and especially sociolinguistics, which looks at language in use, right? Including creative uses of language in the media. And so I found my temporary academic home in media linguistics, in critical digital discourse analysis, and those areas of narratology that were dealing with stylistics, the language of literature across media, semiotic modes, and materialities. And surprisingly, practitioners in literary media arts, though few and far between at British universities at the time, also showed great interest in Elit, although the transmedial practices needed to train Elit artists and writers were only beginning to get taught in higher education. Think of Kate Pullinger's program at Bath Spa, or Lyle Gaines's writing classes at Bangor, or Simon Biggs's work at the Edinburgh College of Arts at the time. And of course, there was Sue Thomas, as Sobhik Mukherjee mentioned yesterday, and her Trace program at Nottingham Trent, which was a vibrant and promising hub for first and second generation Elit artists in the UK and beyond. However, it came to a tragic end when the university suddenly decided to just switch off the server. They just switched off the Trace server when Sue announced her departure. What followed, and that was around about 2004-05, was half a decade of academic angst in the face of electronic literature's uncertain future, during which I published my first monograph canonizing hypertext as a hopeful yet somewhat innocent indicator that any new literary movement first needs to disappear before it can reappear and return on a much larger and more significant scale, and then come into its own. And this is a theory by Jan and Aleida Assmann, the cultural theorists. And indeed, the situation did change in 2011 with the startup of ELMSIP, the project called Electronic Literature as a Model of Creativity and Innovation in Practice. And that was the first major multinational European-funded research project, led by Scott Redberg and Jill Walker-Redberg at Bergen. ELMSIP led to the creation of the first comprehensive database, a knowledge base of Elit works, practitioners, scholars, critical works, events, teaching syllabi, you name it, lots and lots of categories. It's an open access, living, relational database that every community member can contribute to freely. ELMSIP as a project gave rise to conferences, artworks, scholarly publications, and an anthology of European electronic literature. It really put Elit on the map in Europe and contributed significantly to the growth of an international multilingual Elit community beyond the borders of the US and Canada. Its follow-on project, the Norwegian Research Council funded Center of Digital Narrative, literally just got funded and will launch later this year. So watch out when news will emerge from that area of the world. Inspired by these key infrastructural developments, but also by proactive moves on the part of the ELO towards greater inclusivity and internationalization, the past decade has seen major growth and diversification in the field. The Consortium of Electronic Literature, CEL, is only one example of this trend. Led by Davin Heckman and Joe Tabby, CEL has sought to develop the information architecture needed for making born digital creative works and scholarly criticism in Europe, North America, and Australia more findable. Yeah, there's at the moment 11 organizations, but there are plans of widening this infrastructure further to include organizations and projects of the Global South in particular. Of course, this comes with its own challenges. But that's a whole different story for a different talk, I think. So this trend has been augmented and facilitated by the denationalization and decanonization of the literary curriculum in many European countries and institutions. And as well, electronic literature as a field has benefited from productive intersections and dialogues with game studies and digital humanities, some others as well, but those are very major and dominant methodologically and conceptually. Elit now features regularly, albeit not ubiquitously, at digital humanities summer schools, workshops, and conferences, in DH journals and edited collections. Institutionally speaking, my own research has benefited from the growing willingness to cross-appoint Elit scholars like myself between media and cultural and area studies, between media production, creative studies, and digital humanities. My new position here at Regensburg University's Department of International and Multi-Scalar Area Studies, DIMAS, strategically positions my work at the intersections between transnational history, law, sociology, cultural and literary studies, media informatics, and digital humanities. And I hope to welcome many of you in my Emergent Digital Cultures Lab here at this university in the years to come. It's a beautiful city. The situation in India now, as far as I have gained insight into it, is so unique that a purely comparative lens would fail to reflect its idiosyncratic social and infrastructural parameters. In a forthcoming article in the European Journal of Comparative Literature, Samia Badaroy, probably you mentioned this earlier today, Samia, we argue that to do justice to Elit in India, a post-comparatist lens is needed that takes into account the fluidity of its epistemological center, maybe even its non-existence, right? That's a whole debate in its own right. And that avoids the pitfalls of social and material accessibilism a point that, you know, I guess Samia has developed in detail in his keynote. Incidentally, keynote speaker Shamuga Priya and UK digital fiction artist Andy Campbell's Tanakuhai, or the Water Cave, is a great example of how a post-comparative collaborative methodology can work in creative e-literary practice, and how these kinds of joint ventures can help us overcome or at least address some of these access issues. Another aspect of this uniqueness that, you know, that is Elit in India lies in the synergies with digital humanities and game studies that have shaped the what and the how of Elit in India from the start. We have seen this in a variety of presentations at this conference, dealing, for example, with digitization to preserve culture and identity by Fazal Mahmood Shah, or with the importance of archives in an era of decolonization, like decolonial archives by Navanita Singh Gupta. To my mind, this conceptual and methodological interdisciplinarity bodes well for a future in which literary media, like literary media, rather than literature, as a colonial institution of the Gutenberg legacy, can form the starting point and center of e-literary scholarly identity. And in this context, I'd like to share my screen, and I hope this works. You should be able to see a GIF. Tell me if you can't. So this GIF was posted to Facebook last year following the Jan course that I was privileged enough to teach on, you know, and organized by Siddhartha Chakraborty. So this GIF was posted by PhD scholar Yeshabat, and it's in its simplicity and subversive spirit, it put a big smile on my face, and I just thought, oh yeah, that's hilarious and great, but it really stuck with me. It really stuck with me. And it's because of its activist, feminist, and intersectional and refreshingly anti-bookish spirit, right? It really stayed with me, almost like an index of the decolonial potential imminent in Elit scholarship in India. That said, the contributions to this conference have not simply rebelled against Elit's colonial legacy. They've done more than simply deny thy father and refuse thy name, as Siddhartha Chakraborty phrased it so aptly in yesterday's keynote. They have shaped the way to go in so many facets and ramifications. And whilst I can't pay tribute to all the wonderful presentations, and I apologize, I had to miss quite a few, especially today, due to forces outside my power, let me highlight some papers that stood out for me for academic and political reasons, and that exemplify some important trends and research agendas in the fast-growing field of Elit in India. So one of the most visible strands from the outset was that of Elit in participatory culture, such as fan fiction, critical memes, mobile and social media. This indicates that Elit in India has been shaped, perhaps not dominated, but definitely shaped by third-gen culture from the start. Whether it's the same third-gen idea as that propagated by Leo Flores is another question that could well be the object of a separate follow-on conference. For example, the feminist and democratic affordances of Insta poetry as a form of slam poetry, as Champa Chetri has called it, came to the fore in a number of presentations dealing with the synesthetically stunning and liberatory work of the likes of Rupi Kaur, Nikita Gyal, and Vilesa. And similarly, an interesting controversy emerged about which social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, might be the most open, most forward-looking, and ultimately the most conducive to e-literary creative expression. And then who knows what the actual metaverse will give rise to in terms of literary practices when and if it comes. What I do want to add to this debate is the need to fast preserve Elit that emerges on proprietary third-party platforms, because these platforms come and go. They shapeshift and they take groundbreaking aesthetic creativity with them into the ether of obsolescence. Before we know it, Twitter might disappear before our eyes. After all, Mr. Musk's more than dubious decisions have already reduced its user base drastically, and an increasing number of democratically minded users will likely leave or become inactive on this platform as other, less centralized and non-profit driven alternatives become available. One of the issues facing the Elit community is the huge preservation backlog that's been building up through generations of Elit, and especially in the case of Flash. As we've heard from Marjorie Lusebrink, Dina Grieger and her team at Washington State have been engaged in a large-scale externally funded project to preserve Elit works in Flash, StorySpace, HyperCard, and other obsolete formats, and make them accessible to posterity, known as the Next. And this is a huge undertaking, made possible only through a combination of paid and precarious labor, like most DH projects, of course. The only way to prevent further such backlogs building in the future is a combination of using widely compatible, historically stable, non-third-party making tools for creation, think of HTML5, and ad hoc preservation. So when you do see Elit in practice, document it, screen grab it, save it, and surround it with metadata, and especially in such evanescent technologies as commercially driven social media. A second trend that's been emerging is literary and narrative gaming, which pleases me no end, as you can imagine. Abhi Ganguly's paper on Cyberpunk 2077 and Karthik Naray's paper on the walking simulator What Remains of Edith Finch have shown that narrative video games may have a much easier life within Elit in India than was the case in Europe and Anglo-American academias for a long time. And this was confirmed by Souvik Mukherjee's keynote, in which he said narrative games are close enough to Elit to merit inclusion in its corpora. And I also agree with Dr. Mukherjee that it would be wonderful to see more engagement with more Indian-born narrative games in terms of creative experimentation and scholarship. What is certain, though, is that to be Elit, it is not necessary to have a precursor in print, which is not to dismiss the lasting importance of print culture and the hegemony of the page, as we've seen in several contributions to this conference, nor is even the written word as a dominant semiotic mode decisive for Elit as an overarching genre. When the written word does feature dominantly, as we've seen in Abdullah Pawai's presentation on Battlefield 5, the materialities and textual conventions surrounding it, think letters from the front, can be productively recontextualized and entextualized in interactive, ergodic, and procedural gaming environments. And I would expect several such experiments to emerge in the wake of the Russian war against Ukraine. Reading here becomes a mechanic that will shape the richness and immersive nature of the gaming experience as a whole and delivers a sense of achievement and progress, which is of particular value for literacy and literary education. This conference has also shown that studying Elit can involve remediations of ancient myths in new digital environments. Think of Namrata Gohil's and Rashmi Sharma's papers on digital and especially feminist retellings of the Mahabharata myth across a variety of multimodal online platforms. But alongside elements of translation, adaptation, remixing, and remaking, the conference has also brought to the fore research on emergent genres, forms, and platforms that are being studied widely from aesthetic and theoretical angles, as well as with a view to their applications in non-academic communities, both outside and inside of India. And a real highlight for me was yesterday's panel featuring Tanya Kaur and Alicia Chauhan's talk on Elit therapy, understanding trauma and healing through selected manga manhwa comics, because it highlighted how Elit might become a tool for reading and writing therapy online. Similarly, Sutirtha Roy's paper on interactive conservation in virtual reality showcased how immersive Elit can absolutely stand on an even keel with other immersive media when it comes to environmental education. Finally, coming from a methodological perspective, there is enormous potential in taking advantage of the digital humanities frameworks and discourses within which Elit has been emerging in this country. And it's indeed worth considering critical making in diverse digital and transmedial technologies and platforms as a key component of digital humanities, as Mariam Nancy reminded us in her presentation yesterday. As Leo Flores said in his keynote, the priority might or should lie on finding the funding for building fora for creative production, as well as digital-born archives and preservation initiatives, and on doing so in a sustainable, continuing manner. To conclude then, I'm not really in a position to give advice about where Elit in India should go. That's not for me to say. But I want to echo Leo Flores that, quote, I think each country or region needs to discover its own Elit and digital writing and establish its own generational frameworks, going beyond the literary and cultivating Elit proactively in academic institutions and by building platforms for creative production and scholarly interaction. Further to this, I want to send out a note of encouragement to this wonderful, energetic, and creative community. An encouragement to ride the waves of neo-constructivism. Yes, to pick up things where you are. Don't pick up anything else, pick up things, you know, from where you are in a situated way. But also to place emphasis on helping empower emergent artists and especially disenfranchised voices of women, non-binary folks, transgender folks, and other marginalized groups, right? Enter Sultana's reality for real, so to speak. It's an encouragement to run with and break, if appropriate, the technologies, epistemologies, and creative legacies that you have and you have access to, and to develop a completely new multilingual e-literary movement with its own decolonial archives, works, practices, and theories. And I will be the first to want to come and study them at your institutions, online and offline, thus broadening my own horizons of what electronic literature can be in the unique embodied and situated contexts afforded by the Indian subcontinent. And also especially how Elit in India might operate as a creative, political, and emancipatory force for equity, peace, and social change in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ensslin. And now to offer my vote of thanks, I wouldn't be formal. I would just, like to share with my, friends here, senior or younger people like Soumya. So when I joined a Gyan, Aligarh Muslim University workshop, where, Professor Ensslin was the, main, source person. It was the brilliant way that she could get across to people who did not have any inkling or were not exposed to. But I wouldn't say that I was not exposed to the e-literature, the older format. I didn't know that the things that I was reading was easy when I was reading at that point of time. I used to read those stories which were e-literature, but not in the format that, in advanced or in a gaming or where you had a lot of coding. But, the way she imparted that, she's a terrific and a fantastic, I think so, educator, teacher, and she's fantastic in communication, it was just blew all the participants off. And that is where I was not exposed to this kind of thing. And I got hooked at this age. I'm not saying I'm not very young. So, but even at this stage, it made me, like I should do something about it. And that is my initiation into the way she, because I would like to give credit to that. And also the Gyan, organizers, of, Aligarh Muslim University. And then, of course, to Professor Ensslin, the way she conducted, the way she conveyed, the way she communicated. She's a fantastic, there's no word to express the kind of a person that who teaches or who inspires. So I learned also a lot, in a way, how I should communicate in my classroom. So that is also, in a way, I would like to give thanks to Professor Ensslin. And I think, the inspiration behind this, Elit, webinar, I think, it's also Professor Ensslin. And also, so that I wanted the younger generation, people who are into that, so that they would also have a platform for the future. So that, branching out into new, areas of specialization, which would open out, new areas in our department, besides the, traditional orders or canonical, areas that we work in. And now I would like to also offer my thanks to our HOD, who, when I brought forth this idea that we should somehow have a webinar, she was so enthusiastic about it. She went all the way out to go to the registrar, to the VC's office to get a permission, because we need the permission to have a webinar, and somehow she got that permission. It was an official permission that we, actually, because without that, we wouldn't be, organizing it. Then I would like to, give my thanks to all my colleagues today who were at short notice, and also our former, head HOD, Professor Jerry. She is also somebody who had initiated digital humanities in our department. And at short notice, I asked her, you have to chair sessions. I have to get somebody, because not many of us are, specialists in this field. And then last but not the least, I would like to give, thanks to all my research scholars, my younger, colleagues, first to, Dr. Shajia Salam, to Dr. Sumayya Nads, and they are the two moderators. And to my research scholar, that is Muhammad Fazal Ahmed, and he is the main technical coordinator. And all the other reporters, all my other students, I just don't want, I have to name them actually. And starting with Monib, who is also the other moderator, Sango Bidani, who's also a guest lecturer in our department. Then the reporters, Arisha Habib, reporter Hisma Binte, and who was the other one? Noor Sabah. And did I miss anybody? Fazal, remind me. And
Binte.
Yeah. Who else? The reporters. Who are the other reporters? I hope they don't mind. But now, and the most important person who is not from Jamia is the thanks to Soumya, young research scholar, a young blood into, who is also, the founder of the Elit Association of India, and thanks to him, he is the one who is very, very, passionate about it. He is very enthusiastic. He's eager to help. And I hope that we collaborate and do something out of this conference, something more solid comes out of that. And that's the thanks that I would like to give to all my colleagues today who took time out of the busy schedule to be, a participant, to chair sessions, and in whatever way to cooperate. And thanks to all the other students where I had to miss some of my classes, and tomorrow onwards, I'm really going to take some extra classes. Because of this webinar, I had missed some classes. So that's it, Simi, do you have to say something? I would like to ask some of my, colleagues.
I would really like to thank you, Shimi. I mean, this was an absolutely this was an absolutely fantastic conference, and really, I mean, all credit to you for putting together such a fantastic conference and bringing the best of people.
It's a teamwork. It's a total teamwork.
We all totally agree with this, Shimi. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, I really enjoyed these 2 days.
It was all due to you, Shimi. I mean, we are just.
And I hope that we can also in the future have, Professor, and invite Professor Ensslin to our university.
Absolutely, we'd love to have her.
We look forward to that.
Projects.
Yes, love that.
Yeah, we would like to, because she's a fantastic teacher. I would want her to, our students to meet her, hear her, and then at least, listen to what she has to teach or say.
Absolutely. Yes.
I would say there's no word to describe it.
Yes, we would love to have Astrid over.
Yeah. Right. Invite her sometime to our university.
And as I said, I mean, I'd like to extend the invitation as well. I know it's a long way, but Regensburg is definitely worth a visit.
Yeah.
Right, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and thanks, Shimi. I mean, 3 cheers to you, really. I mean, absolutely fantastic, really. Thank you so much, Astrid, for joining, and thanks, really, really looking. I really hope that we can have you visit us physically in India sometime.
Yes. I also especially want our students,
That's right. Yes.
Yes, true.
Yes. Yeah. And we also want to develop, Shimi, as you said, that into something concrete to come out of the conference in terms of actually some courses and papers. So that's something that we're looking for.
We did not have too many the master's students here because they have their exams.
So that's
or otherwise would have many more participants, which most probably would have been difficult to fit in.
But the best thing is that we've made recordings and these will be part of the YouTube archive of the department. So students who've missed out would be able to revisit these sessions and actually listen to them again.
So like,
excellent.
Any more observations?
We don't want this to end, Shimi. It's been such a treat.
Nobody wants to leave, actually.
That's right. Nobody wants to leave, really. Yeah.
For this last, few weeks, been very busy. It's like after that, when you're very busy and suddenly, there's a little bit of lull. But then again, from tomorrow, I'll have to attend classes. All of us. Right. And Soumya, do you have to say something? He's a young person, who is from Jamia, but then he was very...
Samya,
volunteered on his own.
We're such big fans of your work, Samya. I mean, absolutely keep up the good work, and we hope to be able to. Yeah, we want to invite you over sometime, Samya, and I hope we can develop something together.
Delhi is just one train ride away from where I am, so please.
And he's a young fellow. He's very, very enthusiastic, volunteering on his own. And I said, I was a little bit apprehensive. I don't know him that well. But then while, conversing, communicating, he's a very nice, sweet fellow, so eager to help. And I'm so thankful for whatever little way that he could help this way. But then,
Sorry, Samya, please go ahead.
No, please. I'm also very thankful that I was able to be a part of this conference, which I feel is very important. Because these conversations have to continue and it can't stop here. There has to be manifestations of it, and in-person manifestations are very important. We have the academic discussions. Now we really have to go into the performance and
something real concrete,
the creative part of it, where people come and show off their artwork, like those exhibitions that used to happen in our localities, drawing competitions, like just display works of art. So it's like bringing back that kind of a creative endeavor to the study of literature via this new thing that we are trying to do. I think that is something that
absolutely we'll plan that. And Siddharth is also here, Shimi. And what is really notable is that one of our retired professors, Professor Shyamala Narayan, is also with us. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it just tells us that so many people have actually.
I think hats off to Siddharth. I didn't see him. His Gyan course started everything.
That's right.
As the coordinator, his Gyan, that workshop. And that's how to see, or meet or hear, Professor Ensslin. And then I thought, she's inspirational in the way to how to get across to students or teach somebody, So it was a fantastic, kind of a thing. I really then wanted that some of our students should, get the opportunity to hear her speak, or her classes, attend her classes. Right. Thank you so much, Siddharth. And what else?
Yes,
to end, but anyhow, So I think,
unless you tell us to go, Shimi,
you can call it a day now.
You have to tell us to go.
Do you have something to say?
Hanging around. So
Nisha, do you have something to say?
Say bye to Astrid. Thank you so much, Astrid, for joining us. And thanks, Shimi. It was such a wonderful treat. Really, hats off to you. Okay. Absolutely fantastic. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.